I reached out to Christopher because some of the things he said during the 2020 forecast have continued to stay with me in a really real way. Like as I'm navigating the waters of these changes personally, I keep hearing his advice, his guidance, the words that he shared during that event. So I'm so happy to have you here, Christopher. Thank you for joining us.
Be here. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate
Uh, all right. So why don't we just start? Because I've found for myself, and I don't know if you all are like this too, I kind of can't hear enough times about the astrology of what's happening. You know,
it.
like give us the perspective again, because we heard it at the forecast event, we heard it in October, we've heard it, and we're hearing it now, but each one of you is highlighting different aspects of it. So
Sure,
yeah,
sure.
can we start there?
And that's the beauty of astrology, is that you're going to actually get different people bringing their take or their perception or their point of view of things. And it's what makes astrology so democratic, you know, and it's one of the things that I really celebrate and love about the art form. Basically, you know, what we're experiencing right now, we kind of experienced 28 to 30 years ago, but in a different order. And what I'm talking about, and there was a lot of talk about Saturn being in Capricorn and the Saturn conjunction to Pluto, and I'm sure that that's something that's been cited over and over and over again in terms of like the collapse of old structures. But this is what we're also experiencing right now in our society, is playing against a background of other predictions that have been made. One of the things that, let me start with Saturn in the Saturn signs, all right, because that's really what we're experiencing right now. Saturn first, or recently entered Capricorn in 2017, and actually was really quite well behaved. I mean, you know, the economy is doing well, and yes, a lot of people would say, you know, there's been this polarization in politics and class system and conversations and attempts at reform and, you know, all these sorts of things. But, you know, Saturn has a reputation for ruin and for bringing down countries and cities and heads of states. It almost has a sort of eclipse-like reputation in a way. And so really, until recently, Saturn was really behaving itself. And the reason I think it was behaving itself is because it was forming trines to Uranus. So it was kind of like calming or redirecting that energy. It was benefiting from a sextile to Neptune. But it's almost like around the time that Saturn moved out of that orb to the sextile to Neptune, which would have been towards the end of last year, that kind of Saturn became unfettered. You know, we talk a lot about a lot about seeing the lessons of Saturn and the understanding of Saturn, and we cast Saturn in positive light. And certainly Saturn has traditionally been the planet of scholars and academicians and of wise people. Saturn still has a reputation as a malefic, as does Mars, and one unfettered, one ungoverned, left to its own devices, let's put it like that, he can start acting in a very difficult and negative way. This was anticipated by many astrologers, I believe, with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And I would imagine a lot of people would talk about the destruction of old forms and you know, a resurrection perhaps of a new. But what I would ask, what I want to sort of point out is that Saturn is traveling through right now 2 Saturn-ruled signs. Okay, so it's both Capricorn and Aquarius. And usually, you know, if Saturn's going through a sign, we're like, oh, 2 years of Saturn, and, you know, if I can just get through it or whatever. But what happens right now is that Saturn is actually traveling through these 2 signs for 4, almost 5-ish years. Okay, so this is how long this block of time belongs to Saturn. It's Saturn's block of time to do with it what it wants to do or is wont to do. What I was keeping in mind, I was very hopeful that Saturn would continue to behave itself as it had been for the last couple of years, but was a little nervous about when it moved, to Pluto. And I'm sure many astrologers who've been on your show would say, a little nervous, Christopher. Should have been very nervous, because it's a conjunction to Pluto, and Pluto's kind of like the modern version of Saturn. I mean, it's inherited a lot of Saturn's more traditional characteristics. But two things came to mind. The last time, of course, was, as an astrologer, I spend a lot of time in the past, probably more time in the past than I do looking at the future, because I look to the past to see a lot of where things are going. And of course, 28 to 30 years ago, or roughly the last time Saturn was traveling through Capricorn and Aquarius, is the 1988 to 1993 chunk. And for people who were, around then, like myself, that's the entrance into Capricorn followed on the heels of the Saturn-Uranus conjunction in Sagittarius, which brought about a very radical and dramatic Wall Street crash in October of 1997. I was an astrologer in New York at that time, a beginning astrologer in New York at that time, and we remember that as being a time of the leapers. And I don't know if you guys understand what leaper means, but what it meant is that people stepped out of their windows and jumped. It was that dramatic, that crash in 97. What followed that very quickly was the collapse of the Berlin Wall. And then we had basically which led into a domino effect, almost of like the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of Russia. So you really have this domino effect that goes from the collapse of the Berlin Wall to that part of the world, the eastern part of the world. And so there was this collapse of government and reconfiguring of society. And this is what Saturn does in the Saturn-ruled signs. It reconfigures civilization and society as it is known. So anything, and this is the general rule of law with Saturn, anything that's on weak foundation, if it's given pressure by Saturn, will collapse and fall. We'd like to do it in ways that are controlled. We're like, oh, maybe I needed to get rid of some of those old books or some old clothes, type of thing. And we're not really ready for the way that Saturn does it on a very dramatic and large scale. And the other thing we have to remember about Saturn is that it's slow. Okay, until the discovery of the modern planets, it was the slowest moving planet. So these are not abrupt changes, sudden changes, ephemeral changes, Uranian or revolutionary changes. These are changes that, it's a slow process. It's a slow plodding parade, okay, of a collapse of any structure which is on solid ground. And so that was very much in my mind as this was repeating, kind of wondering, I wonder where that might happen in this world or whatever. And then, of course, as people who've been tuning into Astrology Hub and listening to the astrologers here, we all know and remember the Great American Eclipse. And the Great American Eclipse was called that because the eclipse was visible. Remember, everyone ran outside and, oh, don't really look at it, or go to areas where it goes, and isn't that exciting? And it is exciting, it's thrilling and all sorts of things, but astrology has a 2,500 year plus history, and not all of the things that it signals are pleasant or nice or transcending. A visible eclipse, actually, in the literature, is regarded as the most dramatic, impactful, and difficult of eclipses. This corresponds with Pluto's return to where it was at the founding of America, 1776. The shadow of the eclipse, an eclipse is most powerful if you can witness its shadow, not the light going out, but its shadow. So the shadow went from, I think it was roughly Oregon, maybe South Washington, down to Florida. So there was this swath of shadow that's there. And so these were indications. You take in the Great American Eclipse, and eclipses have a shelf life of about 2+ years. The Pluto returning to the United States of America's chart, and then what's seen as a very dramatic, once in a lifetime, Saturn-Pluto conjunction. So that's kind of the setup, and I think a lot of astrologers were responding to that. Perhaps what might not have been seen, and a lot of astrology is hindsight. That's why we turn to people who've been writing astrologers from 100, 200 years ago, because they've cataloged these. And so they might not have seen it, but it's something that we as astrologers can use as references. Either it's techniques or observations or things that had taken place at that time. But what also took place here is that Mars was going to pass over this same Pluto-Saturn conjunction. And indeed, Mars passed over that point of the conjunction in the March period, in which everything, I think, starts really shutting down for real or for serious. But you never, in astrology, time something for the date. You give it a run-up time. So you're going to give it like 6 weeks or whatever coming on in. What's intriguing about this is a couple of different things. And here I'm going to be addressing what we're dealing with the shelter in place. Mars is known as named after the Roman god of war, okay? But what Mars isn't perhaps known for as much is that it is the planet of pestilence. It is the planet of plagues. And Mars rules over anything that inflames, feverish, inflammatory. This is all given to the domain of Mars. Mars passed over the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which took place roughly around 28 degrees Capricorn. And the reason that's important is twofold. Mars is not only exalted in Capricorn, meaning Mars gets to do what Mars wants most in Capricorn, and we'll talk about it often in charts as, you know, tremendous ambition and drive, but be sensitive to people and things like that. Well, Mars is going to go and clamor and clang and fight in Capricorn. Moreover, it gets assigned a degree of exaltation, and that degree of exaltation is 28 degrees Capricorn, which is where this Pluto-Saturn conjunction took place. So that basically almost you could see it as unleashes Mars upon the land. Now, our choices could have been, you know, war, you know, and one would say metaphorically, we are at war with this illness, this disease. The other one is plague, and it's pestilence. I want to remind people that the period of time that I'm also referencing, 28 to 30 years ago, 1988 to the 1993 period, is also the height of the AIDS crisis. So we were also dealing with a plague, a pestilence at that time, which was ravaging society, not all of society, but it was ravaging a section of society, and was really, at that point, was really flexing its muscles. I mean, we were years away from the antivirals or the protease inhibitors, which would change the landscape of AIDS. But back then, there was a financial collapse, and there was also another plague that was very much making the headlines and dominating the headlines during that period of time. I know everyone is tired of being sheltered in place. I want to address that. It's very, if you can sort of tune into this energy, it's very Saturnian. Saturn, one of the things that I love from these late medieval, early Renaissance transcripts, which were actually borrowed from the Islamic, was this idea that the planets, each of the planets, ruled over a segment of society. You know, the sun ruled over the royal court and kings. The moon ruled over country folk and people who made their living by fishing or around lakes or bodies of water. Mercury was the merchant, Mars the soldier. Saturn ruled over the lowest rung of society. And what you often see in these engravings, this one I'm referring to is Saturn and his children, is Saturn ruled over the elderly, Saturn ruled over the poor or the disenfranchised, and Saturn ruled over prisoners, people in prison. So what you see, all you have to do is look at the headlines, is that you see that the population that is targeted the most right now are the elderly, are the poor and the disenfranchised, and are people in prison populations. So these are Saturn's children, or these are, you know, this is where it's being wrought or being brought down. But the thing that almost the lesson or the direction, if I could be so bold as to sort of offer an idea to think about, is that Saturn was also the planet connected to monasteries, hospitals, prisons. These were the areas of life that he ruled, retreats. So this whole idea of Saturn having moved into Aquarius, which we know as a air sign, as a social sign, as a sign of society. This whole idea of social distancing is a very Saturn and Aquarius idea. This whole idea of sheltering away, of distancing from another person, these are all Saturnian. The idea that you're supposed that to go into reflection or study, these are all Saturnian themes, as are unfortunately the negative themes, which are the stories that we're hearing about domestic abuse and what goes on in the home, because literally people are imprisoned with, and so what's coming out are all of those hidden or secret things. And again, this is all Saturn. But I think what Saturn has done is, well, I sort of want to set this up very quickly too, if I haven't overloaded you with too many images, but Saturn and Jupiter form a great conjunction once every 20 years. This was called the Great Conjunction in ancient Greece and Islamic astrology. And it was great because it was so rare and lifespans weren't very long back then. And so it was really quite an extraordinary thing. So for every 20 years, you'll see Saturn and Jupiter come together. They're actually, you can see them tonight, not tonight, you can see them at 5:30 or 6 in the morning. Go look at where the sun's going to rise just before, and you'll see the two of them. All you have to do is you'll see Jupiter, which is the lighter, and then you'll see Saturn over here, who's the dimmer. And they're actually slowly over the next year moving to a conjunction. You can see it for yourself, and it's really quite a sight. It's really quite something to see. But they form these conjunction once every 20 years, but for every 200 years, if you can follow me on this, they will draw a triangle over 3 points in one element, okay? So for the last 200 years, you've had Saturn and Jupiter conjoining in Earth signs, okay? So they, I believe they began in, I'm not gonna remember right, but let's say it was Capricorn, and then it went Virgo, and then Taurus, and then back up to Capricorn. And they do this 3 times over a 200-year period. And that basically emphasizes the element, the element Earth. And the last one that they formed was, well, Earth is our world, the world that we live in, and I could give a whole long thing, but I'll spare you. But basically, Earth rules over the element of health and wealth. Okay, so this is the element that we're leaving behind. This is what we experienced, a change in health and wealth with these planets in Capricorn and in Earth sign. And now they're preparing their first conjunction in Aquarius and air sign. And for the next 200 years, that triangle that they'll trace once every 20 years is going to be in air signs. And so the emphasis is changing, and we see it in our headlines. I mean, your headlines and things going on in the world will tell you so much astrology, but the whole thing of, time's running out with Greta, we're nearing the end, our planet is suffering, has our planet done this to us because it's tired of us suffering and insisting that we change things? These are all coming to a climax as these two planets will form their next conjunction in air. Air is going to be society, its rules, laws, government, the way, our etiquette, the way that we act with one another. So this is what's changing. And for those who follow politics, you can't help but notice that, some of the very leftist or liberal ideas, which seemed way out there, are all of a sudden very centered right now in the conversation, with concerns about national health care and a safety net, unemployment, helping people out. So it's actually going to be exciting how this conversation takes place, because the orientation, of course, is going to air. But one comment and then one other thing. But what's kind of lovely is that, if you keep in mind, it's moving into air, people in Los Angeles or India or whatever, they're now looking at the miracle of air. All of a sudden this air pollution's gone and everything's so clear. And it's like, wow. You know, I mean, there was a photograph where someone in India was saying, I can see the Himalayas for the first time and whatever. So it's cleared the air. It's cleared the air that we breathe, but it's also cleared the air in terms of things coming out and how these conversations are going to take place and all these sorts of things. And I like to think of Saturn having moved into Aquarius, having told everyone, you are all going to your rooms, and you're, you know, it's almost like a disciplinarian parent. You're all going to go to your rooms and think about what you've done, and think about what you want this world to be. And it's a long think. Saturn isn't a 5-minute exile to the room. It's like a long think and ponder. And it's making people really, you know, the planet almost literally had to bring things to a stop to get people to think and to reflect. Now, of course, I'm sure everyone is like, when's this going to be over? When can we come out? I mean, because we're all feeling like munchkins, right? What happened with the Wicked Witch of the West? You know, and we're waiting for Glenda to come and say, come out, wherever you are. You know, we're all hiding under our, like, you know, leaves and pumpkins and things like that. I think the recovery is going to be patchworky, you know, it's not going to be all at once. One of the things that I am looking at, and I do want to give the heads up on, is that a lot of the power of this particular Saturn was because Saturn was in its own sign, Capricorn. And Mars, I'm convinced, was a trigger, especially connected to the idea of plague, pestilence, all these sorts of things. Mars moves into Aries later on this year, about August, September, where it will be at home. Saturn will have retrograded back down into Capricorn, where it's at home, and they will be forming the square. Now, usually that would have just been 6 weeks, Mars going through Aries and things like that. But Mars turns retrograde in Aries, so 6 weeks becomes almost 6 months. And moreover, they square around that 28-degree point. I think the first square is at Saturn 28 Capricorn, Mars at 28 Aries. So, you know, if you sort of play around with the idea that Mars might sort of rule its or be connected to its exalted point. So those two squares, which are in the September period, and then Mars being there through early January, I would strongly advise everyone to, I'm not saying like it's all going to happen again, but be very careful. I think that the messages and the messaging that we're getting about being very slow and cautious about all of this is very right on, because it could come back again. And these are things that need to be really regarded. And I think that one of the things that I talked about, if I'm remembering, Amanda, when we spoke for the 2020 predictions, was the word accountability. You know, that was like a big word for me. And that's the funny thing about astrology. You can be like, oh, this seems to resonate, but I don't really know if I know what I'm talking about. Let's see what happens, you know, sort of thing. But the idea of accountability right now, government being accountable to its people, each of us being accountable to someone else in terms of social distancing or the way that we regard one another. Accountability in terms of like what's going on behind the scenes and the people who are on the front lines of this. I mean, it's very martial, and who are fighting this war. And wars never seem that virulent or bad to people who aren't on the front lines, you know, but that doesn't mean you're immune from it or that you're apart from it. And so this whole idea of figuring out how these waves are going to work, I think that, again, practicing personal accountability, and it's a way to bring something into your life that makes you feel not so anonymous or helpless, perhaps, you know, of practicing good etiquette, good accountability, you know, and really sort of governing your living space. I think that these things are going to be very important. And of course, you know, what happens at times like these is actually people do stand up for their communities. They come out and they support and are there for each other, you know, and in many ways we're getting back to the roots of what makes our country our country. I mean, a Pluto return happens once every, what, 240 years or something like that. And so Pluto, we're often uh, think about in terms of being buried treasure, you know, the potential that lies underneath. And it certainly is it certainly does stand for that. I mean, Pluto is buried underneath the floorboards of each of our horoscopes, but we don't always know what's buried underneath the floorboards. Is it buried treasure, or is it rot, R-O-T, you know? And those are the things that we're really having to be accountable for. You know, our nation doesn't have a lovely history all the time. It has a very dark history. It was built on slavery. It still has those notions that are very much at work. So these are the things that are being brought to the front when we're seeing, you know, the higher death tolls with African American communities, and with the disenfranchised. You know, that call upon ourselves as a democracy, that call upon yourself if you're a religious person, that call to action or accountability if you're a spiritual person. These are things that aren't just to be put up with. These are things that we need to engage in our lives, and to change in our own little corner of the world that we can, and to come together as a country in whatever new country we're going to be, because we're not going back to who we are before, and we don't have the clearest idea of where we're going from here, but we also have some very strong clues, and we also have some very strong hints that are coming out right now. And this I see as the relationship of what goes down here below with how it's timed up there in the sky.
Wow. I mean, I've been writing my little notes. I have so many questions, of course, as always. But that summary of the astrology and the way that you were interpreting it and the way that you are interpreting it is super helpful. I mean, just for us to just come back, because I think sometimes just the knowledge that in so many ways this was written, you know, this was destined for all of us. There is a little bit of like, okay, well, if that's the case, then what do we do with it? And, you know, how do we work with it? So, you know, it's not someone's fault, or, you know what I'm like, it's, if you were just looking at the astrology and you were all just looking at the astrology, you knew something huge was coming. And so I have a couple questions. You're emphasizing the United States Pluto return and the Great American Eclipse, but obviously this is a global experience.
Right.
So do you think the United States will have the biggest impact in the end of this? Or are you just saying that for the United States, this is a big part of the storyline that we are navigating?
Yes, it's B. I don't feel competent to talk to any other.
Right. Like we don't know what's happened in Italy's astrology here. Yeah.
Those are, and you know, we may all live under the same sky, but it's like the weather. I mean, one part of our country or one part of our world may be experiencing a storm front, and it's light and sunny somewhere else. You know, I mean, we go out at night and all of that is equalized because we look at stars, but the stars are going to relate to each part of the globe or each person, like each person differently. And so I can only feel, I would never presume to speak for another country or even worldwide.
Okay, so but this Pluto impact, the way you're talking about, like what's under the floorboards, is it rot or is it buried treasure? That's a storyline that's very specific to our country right now.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because and to clarify that for some of the people who are viewing, it's because that's where Pluto appears in our horoscope. Your countries or cities were founded at different times, and so, you know, your Pluto may be in a whole different sign, you know, or you might have experienced your Pluto return 50 years ago or something along those lines. So that's where astrology really specifies, you know, sort of sets up different, you know, we may all be following time, but we're wearing different clocks and watches, you know, and so that's best, I believe, conveyed by a horoscope.
And so how, like, my question is, do you think that we've actually seen what's under the floorboards yet? How long is the process of uncovering? And are we at the beginning of it? Are we, like, how long are we going to be uncovering stuff?
Well, unfortunately, I don't have my issue of Mountain Astrologer upstairs with me because I could throw it up and say it's this degree, but I
Ah,
know it's not like right now, which is why I'm
uh,
saying little, you know, whatever. But the thing is, and I think it's really important to remember, Saturn is a slow moving planet. An even slower moving one is Pluto, okay? And actually Pluto's being very kind. It's only spending 12 years in a sign right now. I think when it moves into Aquarius, it's longer, okay? It begins moving towards its 32 years in one sign type of thing. So it's slow. And what's revealed is what's revealed, but it's not a Uranian reveal. It's not a lightning bolt from heaven. It's
right.
not a Mercurial reveal, which is, oh, this is fascinating. I wonder what we can do with this, you know? It's not a eureka reveal, you know, it's a slow reveal, a slow unpeeling. When we were talking in 2020, I talked about what's bred in the bone will out in the flesh is very Plutonian. You
Mm,
know, Pluto carries that essential, what I sort of borrow from Dane, I openly borrow from Dane Rudar, which is the seed self, this self that we know is who we are, but we don't recognize it or aspire towards it, but it acts in our life. It takes
mm,
us in strange directions. And so Pluto is about that. So Pluto's going to be bringing up all of the things that we're dealing with. You know, I mean, this isn't the first time we're hearing about racism or economic inequality or healthcare isn't fair to everyone and all these sorts of things. But Saturn believes that that necessity is the mother of invention. In other words, Saturn is a disciplinarian. Saturn is, okay, you've talked around this point and you've, you know, come up with different ideas and theories and made all these promises that you never kept. And now I'm unplugging you.
mm.
And you can all have a good long think about where you want to go from here, because we're playing for high stakes right now. We're playing for the stakes of the planet. And in America, we're playing for the stakes of our society. So this isn't an abstraction anymore. This isn't, you know, what you get to usually do, you know, whatever. This isn't kicking the can down the, you know, street. This is here and now. And we've gone through urgency and we all know how to do urgency, but Saturn is not urgency. And Pluto is not urgency. Saturn is slow and Pluto is inevitability. Okay, like you're at the end of the line.
Mm,
So it's up to you.
mm.
And I think that that's where we are.
You know, I remember when all of you were talking about a complete reboot, which is the word we're using today, of society. It was like, that's not going to be comfortable. Like, there's actually no way for that level. Like, when you say a complete reboot of society, it's like, that's going to require so many things that we rely on today, that we lean on today to crumble in order for something new to come through. Normally they're not like being built, you know, this one's here and this one's being built simultaneously,
Sure.
you know. So it's just like, wow, this is going to be intense. And one of the things you said,
The last time we've had to reimagine America from the ground up like this is the last time Uranus was in Taurus, by the way. It's the New Deal. Okay, that's the last time we really had to reimagine America as an entire society.
mm,
Uranus is back in Taurus. Saturn is in Capricorn, is spending some time in Aquarius. So it's a total rethink. So it's not a patch job, it's a total reworking.
well, and Christopher, I keep coming back to this because it seems like it's bigger than the United States. I
It,
mean, it is clearly,
yeah,
but you know, is this societal reboot a global societal reboot?
yeah, it's going to I'm just going to sketch it vaguely, but the nature of the air signs are to be utopian. Okay, and utopia always sounds like a really great word. You know,
Yes.
we all get
Everybody wins. Yeah.
you can run around naked and eat, you know, whatever, and everyone is like, everyone's free, and you know, it's socially recognized inequality and things like that. Well, utopias have an unfortunate history of becoming authoritarian societies. So
Mm,
I think that we're going to start moving from Earth, which is the recognition of boundaries, to air and aerial view, I think that's going to deal with, and we've already seen it, issues of privacy, tracking, for instance, people who are infected with the virus versus people who are not. It's going to lend itself to sovereignties. If the survival of the planet is based on the Amazonian rainforest, are we really going to leave it to a government, a single government? So there might be an annexation. I mean, we're moving out of that type of sovereignty, boundaries, barriers. That's been our last 200 years, okay? And we're moving into a utopian aerial, whether that's, what are those obnoxious things? Those
The
drones,
chemtrails?
or like the drone,
Oh, drones.
satellite, this idea of surveillance
Well,
or,
and satellites blanketing our planet and
right, all those sorts of things. That's, I think we're just beginning that. So we need, and then Aquarius already has a habit of treating Pandora's boxes. It's that scientific mind. This is a curiosity, and Aquarius already has a habit of treating Pandora's boxes like they're Christmas presents tucked under the Christmas tree. So again, we have to be accountable morally, intellectually, economically, moving into the next 200 years. So we happen to be living at a time where we are stepping over that threshold, and I saw something in a lecture that I used the image for a lecture I gave a couple of weeks somewhere else, but, the New Yorker had a picture of the coronavirus, that, haven't we memorized it? It's the globe with the,
yes, yes.
but it was tilted and it was on a school globe so that it had completely replaced the school globe, so it was like a globe and it was a coronavirus. And I was thinking, oh my God, is this the dawning of the age of Aquarius? This, everyone thought it would come in through, harmoniously or whatever, but is it this that makes society stop, global society stop and ask very penetrating questions? And they go on from questions, they're going to go into being applied. And so these are all things, I think, it can get abstract and very blurry very quickly. But I think that if we really focus on the word accountability, that places us in time and in space, and it places us as a citizen in society and a citizen on the planet. And that's where the next 200 years are going.
Wow, so interesting. I remember when you kept using the word accountability, it was like, what do you actually mean by that? What does it actually look like? And how is that going to play out? And, when you're bringing up questions of accountability, there's also the who are we accountable to? And how do we value whose needs are more than others? I mean, because one of the things is, and I saw this, I was like, God, suicide rates are way up.
Yeah.
Way up. And like you said, domestic violence, all these things that are a result of the situation. So there's like, we're accountable to one situation, but sort of not accountable to this other situation. And where do we draw the line, and how do we make judgments? Whose life is more important?
Right now, we are accountable for Earth.
Yeah.
Okay? There's no supernatural entity that's going to come and intervene. Okay, there's no, our civilization has demanded that mankind be in charge. Okay, mankind is in charge. So grow up, it's up to you. What are you going to do with this? Because nature can turn the page of the book. Nature can be like, okay, next. We did dinosaurs, we did mankind, who's next? Nature can do that. And so we have made it through our evolution as a people and through our failures and our accomplishments. We have insisted that we be in charge of this planet. And so now the planet is saying, okay, you're in charge. What are you going to do with it? And that's accountability, also as a species? It's accountability.
Yeah. It's interesting, even just the very small microcosm of like the toilet paper situation, but I'll take that as an example.
It's a great example, actually.
Well, it forces people to be aware of how much we're using. And whenever we feel pressure, oh no, it could go away. Now, all of a sudden we're paying attention to wasting food. We're paying attention to, do I really need to go there, to that place? All these things.
Paying attention to sharing.
Yeah.
If I grab all those rolls of toilet paper, who goes without?
Right.
Paying attention to caring.
Right.
How's my doing?
Right.
How's the old couple down the block doing that can't get to the store? Can I go and maybe do something for them?
Yes.
So it also brings in that, and it slices right through the ideologies and the theologies and all of that, and it's very if you don't mind my using this word, but it's very Christian. What are your acts?
What are your acts?
Good acts.
If we stay right on the accountability thing, I've I've heard of, and if you're doing this, like, there's no judgment, but it was just this like, oh wow, this accountability thing, because it comes up because we all have a choice, given how this is affecting us, to either use it, like even maybe take advantage of it in order to get. So I'll give you the example. Some people like getting unemployment, but then also telling their landlord they can't pay the rent. The landlord doesn't know they're not getting, so then it's kind of like, oh, cool. Like now I'm not paying rent and I'm getting, so, but those decisions, and this is all completely individual, but I've had certain things come up for me. Like, do I indulge that thing that I could probably get away with, but who will know? Only I will know. Only I will know, right? So there's these decisions that we're being asked to make, I think, that are real, like soul-based decisions, where it's like just between you, and you're the only one that knows what's right for you.
They're also, if you could think of it this way, karmic ecosystem decisions.
Yes.
You're part of an ecosystem. We don't have the luxury of like, I'm in this country or I'm over here. You could be top 1% or whatever, but how much are you going to be able to travel around if those less well-to-do or homeless or whatever can infect you? So it's brought the entire society accountability. Suddenly the immigration problem isn't a question anymore because it's a necessary job that's needed, and this isn't going to be okay, things were bad, I promised to be better, and now it's gone back to good, and I'm just going to carry on. No, this is a full stop. This is a Saturn. It's a full stop. And it begs those questions like you were bringing up, Amanda. Like, if I do this, I might feel better, but you know what? My landlord, who maybe I've demonized or something like that, still has to pay bills and upkeep. And if I don't participate as part of this, then that person's going to be in a rough spot. So it changes the old spats, or it changes the old prejudices, or it changes the old, grudges, and it really brings to bear that accountability. You're responsible for the, and that's what we're told with, wear a mask or gloves if you're in a very enclosed space or whatever. Treat people as if you had the virus. And I was like, that's an extraordinary statement, because, the instinct is always to distance, and I have nothing to do with it. But like, if I treat people as if I had this, all of a sudden there's this etiquette, there's this way of being. I'm caring for the other person, and it's, I don't know, I'm probably going off on or whatever, but it's different ways to think about it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Julie says, it's difficult to hear astrology reference history and what is possibly coming, and so many people think this will be done in a few weeks or a month, to gently tell them that it may very well continue into the end of the year and into the next. And I can totally relate with that, Julie. And yet I continue to come back to that Viktor Frankl experience, his life experience in the concentration camps, and how the people that thought there was like a short light at the end of the tunnel were the ones who didn't make it. I mean, the depression and the pressure of the situation, they didn't make it through. But him having okay, I'm in this for as long as I need to be in this in order to come out the other side and tell the story. That was the thing that kept him going.
Right.
But it's actually a loving thing to do, in my opinion, to just say, and of course, it's just, this is what the astrology suggests. And the astrology has been pretty dang right on, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of the timing of how things will go. So it's loving to just say, look, you know what, we're probably in this for the long haul. And again, Anne and I are talking about how we're basically like running an Ironman, or not running, we're doing an Ironman this year. Yeah, and
Yeah.
we just got done with the swimming part, and we're
Right.
about to start the biking part, and then we have the running part, and
Right.
it's a long haul for sure.
Yeah, well, and the thing to keep in mind is, think of the phrase life keeps going. I mean, we often think of that as going back too, but life keeps living. There are people who are dealing with cancer, who are living with
Totally.
this.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
there are people who are dealing with poverty, who are living, so this is something which, because it's being visited on everyone collectively, it doesn't mean we have the same experience, or this experience is going to remain the same. Your life continues, but it evolves, it grows, it changes. You're asking different questions, you're appreciating things differently. So this is more than being sent to your room to account for what you did wrong, but really kind of like coming out of your room, and wow, these things can be different. I mean, this is what matters to me, or this is where I matter for someone else.
Mm-hmm. Christopher, one of the things you talked about in the 2020 event as well was this idea of a regime change, and you didn't mean it the way it's been used historically throughout time, but what you were referring to is a change in leadership, right?
Mhm.
And to have any glimpse of what that change might result in, I think it's really important for us to question who actually has been in charge. Like, who has been the leaders throughout the last, I don't know, are you talking about a regime change from like the last 200 years? Is
Yes,
basically what you were saying. Yes.
we're going from the earth, and again, I can only relate to American history, so I hope I'm not too boring to people who aren't from America, but
Well,
what,
it's like 80% are probably from America.
what
Yeah.
follows on the heels, or actually coincides with that first Jupiter Saturn conjunction in Earth, is the Louisiana Purchase, which in one stroke of a pen doubles the size of the United States of America. We go from being colonies clinging to the shore to all of a sudden into the Midwest. What's ironic again about that is that it was connected to a plague that
Mm.
was taking place in Haiti and Jamaica, and so Napoleon had to sell off money, had to sell off land, and so he sold off basically that Louisiana Purchase, which becomes known as the breadbasket of the United States. So not only does it increase the space and size of our country, it doubles it. It creates the Midwest. It creates this whole mythos of the westward expansion, manifest destiny. I can take what I want, and so that whole period for us as America is connected to the rise of us as a world power, okay, which changes with the last one around 9/11, where we're no longer, where the rise stops, and so we're going to the next place, which is the air. So we're going to go from boundaries, territory, annexing, colonizing, exploiting resources, and environment is like toilet paper, you can use it forever, into an air sensibility, which is going to be humanitarian. But what does that look like? The governing of the populace, and the preserving of resources, and bringing about the more idealistic aspects, like our mind, and rules and laws and grace, and things like that. So there's a total, we've come to the end of the road of the earth regime, and now we're entering into the air regime. The true dawning of Aquarius is right now, and it's going to be over the next 200 years.
Mm. So, Christopher, if you were able to concoct the perfect outcome from this, I mean, what would you see as a positive outcome? Because some of the things that we've talked about, I know that a lot of people, that those would be not great outcomes, in terms of losing rights and privacy and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
So what's another way that it could express that might be a better outcome?
Well, I'm one person, and I'm talking about abstract people. So that's kind of like beyond my ability. But what I would counsel is not to lose the individual in the collective,
Mm.
that it takes one fish to change the direction that a school of fish is swimming in, and it's not really done through great revolutions or whatever, but it's done in small acts. It's small things that are done. That I think that global doesn't mean anonymous, and it doesn't mean I'm faceless. I think it's actually going to be elevating. I think it's potentially can elevate people to think in terms of others as well as themselves. But, that was said over 2,000 years ago too. I mean, we're obviously involved in an evolution, and we're obviously involved in an education. And I think that Saturn is always that teacher, cleave to your teaching moments, learn from your history, and you're not helpless, you're not alone, and you're not faceless. You matter. You might matter to the 2 or 3 other people in your life. You might matter to, the thousands of Instagram followers or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, you matter, and each of us matters. And I think when we were hearing this in the press of like, at least it's not 1 million, it's going to be 200,000, people who may die or whatever at the peak. And I just remember thinking, well, that's 200,000 too many. I mean, like that just really, and so I think this is really coming to people. These things aren't about shaming or getting people to mend their ways. It's getting people to step up in your life. And when you step up in your life, you're stepping up in the lives of the other lives that are affected by you. Mm-hmm. And those people rely on you, and you rely on them. And this is the beauty of, for instance, a planet like Venus, which is all about who you draw into your orbit. The sun is, I need to be the best that I can be. And Venus says, well, you're not going to become that unless you have a lot of good people on your side. And so Venus's job is to bring people onto your side. So, I mean, all of these things, it's just, society is not anonymous, and it doesn't have to be crushing, and it doesn't have to be villainous and unfeeling. It needs a conscience. And maybe that's what we're all being asked to do, is to be the conscience of our society.
Really good. Thank you, Christopher. It is always such a pleasure to have you on our show here and to share your wisdom with our audience. And we're going to get to be doing that more because I haven't even started talking to anybody about this barely, but we do have a new website launching, which I swear you guys is like 4 years too late, but it's finally happening. And one of the things that you're going to be able to do is sign up for weekly horoscopes that Christopher Renstrom is writing for us. And if you haven't gotten in touch with his horoscope writing, it is so good. I tune into my Capricorn horoscope from him every single week. Like I look for the little, I'm excited every week. So we're going to be partnering with Christopher on that. That's coming very soon. I'm going to be giving you like a sneak preview of it too, everybody, soon. And so if you haven't signed up at astrologyhub.com/podcast, I know that sounds weird, but if you sign up there, you'll be able to get all the summary of all the special editions that have happened in the last week. And then I'm going to start also including your weekly horoscope. For Renstrom very soon here. So that's astrologyhub.com/podcast. And I think the biggest, the key words that we kept coming around and around on here, obviously, is the accountability, the idea of what's buried under the floorboards, and what needs to be like brought to the light of day, really, so that we can create a new kind of foundation. And then this,
or face it,
or tear the whole thing down. I mean, right? Yeah. So this, and again, this contemplation with this accountability, I think there's a lot of layers to it that have yet to be revealed to each of us as individuals. And then I just love what you ended with, that we all are contributing and that we matter. And this is the time where this is clear, even if it's, I love this. I keep hearing these words too, step up. Like, it's like, step up. Like, it's hard, it's uncomfortable, it's uncertain, it's unknown. And yet we're still being asked to step up. And I mean, I really think that's part of the process of becoming masterful.
And what is air but
up. Exactly. All right, Christopher, thank you so much, and I'm so happy that we get to share your wisdom consistently now with the weekly horoscope. So thank you for that, and
You.
and thanks all of you for tuning in. It's so amazing to be able to do this with you as often as possible throughout the week. We are going to be doing a special edition on Monday with Kaipacha. And then on Tuesday, we'll have our weekly weather with Ann Ortley. And then we'll see who lines up for the end of the week, because I'm liking doing at least 3 a week. It's just great medicine for all of us. So thank you.
It is.